Hi, my name is Suzanne Miles, and I'll be presenting on the topic of CODIS today. This will be a brief but informative overview of CODIS that will include case scenarios. I'll present part of this as a question and answer format to give the viewer an opportunity to think through their answers. This presentation doesn't go into what DNA is or the science behind how a DNA profile is developed in the laboratory. However, I think it's important to know the terminology that comes up in the rules that follow. A DNA profile is unique to each individual except identical twins. A DNA profile is a group of genetic markers identified in an individual. The term allele can be used interchangeably with the term marker. Each location that is typed will have at most two markers or alleles. One is inherited from the mom and the other from the dad. There are 13 locations or loci that are routinely typed that are used within the forensic community. And a 13 loci profile is considered to be a full profile. Also, two individuals may have the same alleles at one location, but to have two unrelated individuals match alleles at all 13 locations or loci is extremely rare. This is why a DNA profile is considered unique and individualizing. Here's an example of an electropherogram, and this is what a DNA profile looks like on a computer-generated form. And this data is what the analyst uses to do their comparisons. They will compare crime scene sample profiles with reference sample profiles. Let's now start in with the topic of CODIS. I'll start with the name or acronym CODIS. What do the letters stand for? Compiled DNA Information Standards, Collected DNA Interstate, Convicted Offender DNA In-State, Collected DNA of Individual Souls, or Combined DNA Index System. The correct answer is CODIS is the Combined DNA Index System. The next question is, what is CODIS? Is it a list of names of those who have committed a crime? A list of all DNA profiles that a crime laboratory produces? A well-understood tool that seldom causes frustration? Is it a database containing DNA profiles contributed by local, state, federal, and participating law enforcement agencies? Does it describe the FBI's program of support for criminal justice DNA databases as well as the software used to run these databases? The correct answers are the last two, which accurately describe what the CODIS database is. We also talk about CODIS indexes. We have the forensic index. The DNA profile from a crime scene evidence sample, the forensic unknown profile attributed to the suspected perpetrator. The next one is the offender index, and this is the DNA profile collected from an arrestee at the time of arrest or incarceration. There is also a missing person index, and these are DNA profiles from missing persons, relatives of missing persons, and unidentified human remains. Now I'd like to talk a little bit about CODIS eligibility. This is a topic that comes up a lot and is not very well understood. In order for a profile to be entered into CODIS, it must meet the following criteria. It must be a DNA profile that is interpretable. This means that the laboratory analyst is able to interpret a DNA profile according to their laboratory standards and approved thresholds. Next, the reference samples are accurate and complete. This means that the DNA profiles from samples taken from a known individual are accurate and complete. This next rule is very important and often causes confusion. The DNA profile developed from a crime scene sample is called a forensic unknown. A forensic unknown profile, whether it is a single source profile or mixture, or a partial profile, must be attributed to the putative perpetrator. Alleles that come from the victim or others that may be in the mixture, such as a profile from the consensual partner, shall not be entered into CODIS. And that is what is shown on this slide here, is that information derived from a forensic DNA record that are unambiguously attributed to a victim or individuals other than the perpetrator, such as an elimination sample, shall not be offered into NDIS. And CODIS and NDIS just stands for the National DNA Index System. And then finally, I'll describe what is a putative perpetrator. We're talking about an individual who is suspected of committing the crime. Items that are taken directly off of a suspect cannot be entered as a forensic unknown. And this F. myestis is a case that I individually worked at the crime lab where an item of evidence was submitted. Initially, I thought it was a cigarette butt that was collected from the scene of the crime. I did develop the profile that did match Mr. myestis's reference sample. Upon finding out later, this cigarette butt was actually collected from him directly during an interview. And then, of course, that is no longer a forensic unknown, and it was not eligible to be entered into CODIS at that time. So a case comes into the laboratory and is processed. A DNA profile is developed. The analyst will get some information from the investigator about the crime and the particular sample. In each case, the analyst has to ask questions to ensure the profile entered into CODIS is from the putative perpetrator and also meets the FBI criteria for eligibility. Here are some of the examples of what we see in the decisions that are made. And here you'll be able to participate a little bit as far as what your decisions would be as well. So of these case scenarios, which DNA profiles can be entered into CODIS? So here we have a blood stain on a suspect's shirt that matches the victim. Can this be entered into CODIS? No, the victim DNA profile shall not be entered into the CODIS database. Next, we have a cigarette butt that was found next to a campsite where a sexual assault occurred that has an unknown profile on it. Can that be entered into CODIS? Is that CODIS eligible? No, this one is not either. It's because it's not clear that the person who smoked the cigarette committed the crime of the sexual assault. The profile must belong to the putative perpetrator, and it's not clear how long the cigarette butt has been there. The next case, we have found a blood stain on a broken window of a house that was burglarized. The homeowners say that the window was intact when they left the night before, and an unknown profile was developed from the blood. Would that be eligible for CODIS? Yes, the profile likely belongs to the putative perpetrator and is eligible to be entered and searched in CODIS. The next case, we have swabs, vaginal swabs from the victim. The profile matches a suspect. The suspect admits to sexual contact. Does this go into CODIS? Yes, it does. If the investigator believes that a crime occurred and he wants to investigate it further as a crime, the profile is eligible to be entered and searched in CODIS. Same scenario, however, so we have the vaginal swab, but this time we have a male profile, but an unknown donor. We don't know who the suspect is. Is that eligible to be searched in CODIS? Yes, the profile is eligible to be entered and searched in CODIS. Next scenario. We have found a seminal fluid stain matching the suspect collected from the suspect's apartment, the scene of a sexual assault. Would that stain, the profile, be eligible? No, it is difficult to know when the seminal fluid was left on the bedding. It may be expected that we would find seminal fluid on the suspect's own bedding, and it is not clear if it was associated with the crime. However, we have seminal fluid stain matching the suspect collected from the victim's apartment, the scene of a sexual assault. This profile, it is more clear that it is directly related to the crime, and the profile is eligible to be entered and searched in CODIS. So as you can see, as we go through some of these case scenarios, it is really a case-by-case process where there's a lot of information sharing between the DNA analyst at the laboratory and the investigator so that it is clear what we are all entering into CODIS. So these slides I have taken from the FBI website, and it's a really good resource. They've really broken down the rules and even come up with their own case scenarios to kind of help the user know and understand the whole process from start to finish. So, you know, if there is more information that you're looking for, you can certainly go to the FBI's website. Just Google FBI and CODIS Eligibility, and you can find a wealth of information there. So, commonly asked question, a male profile is developed from a vaginal swab. The investigator knows who the suspect is and that his profile is already in CODIS as a convicted offender sample. Can the CODIS profile be used for comparison for this case? So in this case, no. This is a very common question that comes up in the laboratory for us, that just because we have a profile that already we know that person and that profile is in CODIS, it is because the collection of the samples from the arrestees and the convicted offenders, they go through a different process to be entered into CODIS, and it doesn't follow the chain of custody as does evidence submitted at a crime lab, and therefore it's inadmissible in court. So what we like to tell investigators is that if you do know that there's a suspect that exists for the case, a new sample must be collected from that suspect for purposes of comparison and reporting. It adds a lot of work on the investigative end, but further down the road, it is, of course, evidence, and we can testify in court to those results. As I said before, here's information from the FBI's website. That is the address. And from that website, I went in and decided to go ahead and show these next slides that kind of show a case from when it's worked to the point that a DNA match has been made in CODIS. So in the case of a sexual assault where an evidence kit is collected from the victim, a DNA profile from the suspected perpetrator is developed from the swabs in the kit. The forensic unknown profile attributed to the suspected perpetrator is searched against their state database of convicted offender and arrestee profiles contained within the convicted offender and arrestee indices, if that state is authorized to collect and database DNA samples from arrestees. So that profile is searched. If there is a candidate match in the convicted offender or arrestee index, The laboratory will go through procedures to confirm the match, and if confirmed, will obtain the identity of the suspected perpetrator. The DNA profile from the evidence is also searched against the state's database of crime scene DNA profiles called the Forensic Index. If there is a candidate match in the Forensic Index, the laboratory goes through the confirmation procedures, and if confirmed, the match will have linked 2 or more crimes together. The law enforcement agencies involved in these cases are then able to share the information obtained on each of the cases and possibly develop additional leads. And one final slide to discuss verification, which is just added time on the back end after a match is made. Once a match is identified by CODIS software, the laboratories involved in the match exchange information to verify the match and establish coordination between their 2 agencies. The match of the forensic DNA record against the DNA record in the database may be used to establish probable cause to obtain an evidentiary DNA sample from the suspect. The law enforcement agency can use this documentation to obtain a court order authorizing the collection of a known biological reference sample from the offender. The casework laboratory can then perform a DNA analysis on the known biological sample so that this analysis can be presented as evidence in court. For more information, I encourage you to visit these websites. Again, they've got a wealth of information. And of course, if you have any additional questions, feel free to call the Utah State Crime Laboratory. And here I've offered my email address and then various phone numbers that you can use to reach myself or anyone else at the laboratory.